Throughout its history, Scotland has never been notorious for its cavalry. The British Army has only ever fielded one regular horse regiment explicitly in the Scottish tradition, the Scots Greys, formerly the 2nd Dragoons. However, across Scotland, numerous yeomanry have been raised for its service, both at home and abroad, some of them namely the Lovat Scouts, becoming quite notorious. The term yeomanry derives from the English yeoman, meaning a small holding farmer. Yeomanry regiments were largely made up from rural parts of the country, officered by the landed gentry and the rankers from horse-owning men of the shires, often the tenants of their officers. Initially, yeomanry regiments were not sent overseas and were used to quell unrest in the local areas. They were under the control of the Lord Lieutenant of the county, although this changed in the 1870s in order to professionalise the force, leading to it being subsumed by the War Office. The yeomanry have largely performed the light cavalry role when in combat, often tasked with reconnaissance, patrolling supply lines, providing convoy escorts and skirmishing with enemy screens. The yeomanry began to serve abroad in the Second Boer War, both World Wars, and while since having suffered terrible mergers, continue to provide reservist soldiers for cavalry regiments in the British Army. In Scotland, this takes the form of the Scottish and North Irish Yeomanry, which is paired with the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards. There were once 7 yeomanry regiments across Scotland: the Ayrshire Earl of Carrick's own yeomanry, the Fife and Forfar yeomanry, the Scottish Horse, the Lothian and Border Horse, the Lanarkshire yeomanry, the Lovat Scouts, and finally the Queen's own Royal Glasgow yeomanry. We will divide covering these regiments into 3 parts, and this week we will look at the Scottish Horse, the Fife and Forfar yeomanry, and the Lovat Scouts. 2 regiments, known as the Scottish Horse, were raised in the late 1900s in response to heavy casualties in the Second Boer War. The first was raised by the Marquess of Tullibardine, and the second raised by the 7th Duke of Atholl. Both saw service in Western Transvaal. It was disbanded after the war but reformed in 1903 as the Scottish Horse Imperial Yeomanry, equipped as dragoons, and was the County Yeomanry Regiment for Perthshire, Aberdeenshire, Elgin, Nairn and Argyll. It was shortened to simply the Scottish Horse in 1908, the first Scottish Horse based in Dunkeld and serving Perthshire, and a second Scottish Horse based in Aberdeen, serving Aberdeenshire, Elgin, Nairn and Argyllshire. At the outbreak of the Great War, the regiments were greatly expanded and formed the Scottish Horse Mounted Brigade in August 1914, serving within the 63rd Northumbrian Division, and was assigned to coastal duties, but by 1915 they were ready for overseas service. As part of the 2nd Mounted Division, the regiment served at Gallipoli, fighting as infantry during the landing of Suffolk Bay. Here it suffered very heavy casualties and were eventually evacuated to postings on the Suez Canal. They then became the 13th Battalion Scottish Horse Yeomanry of the Black Watch, seeing action in Salonika, Greece, as infantry. The 3rd Regiment, however, was formed into the 26th Scottish Horse Squadron of the Machine Gun Corps, serving with the Cameron Highlanders on the Macedonian front before ending the war on the Western Front. Following the Great War, it was decided that cavalry was largely outdated, at least in mass use, and as a result, many yeomanry units across Britain were to be repurposed. The Scottish Horse was merged into just one regiment, but was able to remain a formally mounted unit, designated as Scouts. Indeed, they began the Second World War as mounted cavalry. However, they lost their horses in 1940, and were split, become the 79th and 80th Scottish Horse Regiments of the Royal Artillery. Here they operated howitzers and served in the 6th Army Group during the Italian campaign. Following the war, the Scottish Horse was reconstituted as a regiment and transferred from the Royal Artillery to the Royal Armoured Corps. In 1956, the regiment was merged with the Fife and Forfar Yeomanry to become the Fife and Forfar Yeomanry / Scottish Horse. The regiment had one V.C. recipient earned in the Boer War by Lieutenant William John English for running to fetch more ammunition over 15 yards under heavy fire from only 20 to 30 yards away at Vlakfontein. Lieutenant English would later go on to become Lieutenant Colonel in the Scots Greys, but died of a brain hemorrhage near Egypt in 1941. He was in fact an Irishman, with the surname of English, serving in a Scottish regiment. The Scottish Horse had a very smart uniform, athel grey tunic and riding breeks with a slouch hat sporting black cock's tail feathers. Their badge comprising the cross of St Andrew with its laurel and juniper wreath. When in tartan, the regiment wore athel tartan. However, pipers, formerly known as trumpeters due to it being a cavalry unit, wore Tullibardine tartan. The traditions of the regiment are upheld within the SNIY, or Scottish and North Irish Yeomanry, and its guidon, the cavalry equivalent to regimental colours, are laid up in Dunkeld Cathedral. The Fife and Forfar Yeomanry is somewhat older than the Scottish Horse, originally raised as two separate regiments in the mid-east of Scotland, roughly Fife and Angus. The Kirkcaldy troop, raised in 1797, later underwent a series of name changes: the Fife Yeomanry Cavalry, and then the 1st Fifeshire Mounted Rifle Volunteer Corps. On the other hand, the Forfar Yeomanry was raised in 1794, becoming the Forfarshire Yeomanry in 1856, and then the 1st Forfarshire Light Horse Volunteer Corps in 1876. After three major defeats suffered by the British Army in the Second Boer War in 1899, known as Black Week, a royal warrant was issued creating the Imperial Yeomanry, which required existing yeomanry regiments to provide squadrons for the foreign active service. This led to, in 1901, the Fifeshire and Forfarshire Volunteer Corps merging as the Fifeshire and Forfarshire Imperial Yeomanry. Along with the Lovat Scouts and Inverness-shire Royal Horse Artillery, they served in the First World War as part of the Highland Mounted Brigade. Part of them constituted the 14th Battalion of the Black Watch, serving as dismounted soldiers in the 74th Yeomanry Division, seeing action in Egypt, Palestine, and later France. Following the war, it became an armoured car company in the Royal Tank Corps, but in 1939, with war imminent, the Territorial Army was doubled in size, and two regiments known as the 1st and 2nd Fife and Forfar Yeomanry were formed. The 1st FFY formed the reconnaissance force for the 51st Highland Division and was evacuated at Dunkirk after the failed BEF expedition. It later saw action on 1944 within the 9th Armour Division, operating Churchill tanks, seeing heavy action as it crossed the Rhine in 1945. Their brothers in the 2nd FFY landed within the 11th Armoured Division in the Normandy landings, taking part in a string of heavy fighting engagements including Battle of the Adon, Operation Goodwood, and the Battle of the Bulge, the ambitious German counter-offensive in the winter of 44. Following the war, it became an armoured car regiment, but was shortly after amalgamated with the Scottish Horse to become the Fife and Forfar Yeomanry / Scottish Horse, and the lineage is still maintained by the SNIY, forming its C Squadron, which still bears the name and headquartered in Cooper Fife. Their battle honours are laid up in Cooper Old and St Michael Tarvit Parish Church. The FFY had a very smart uniform, consisting of a scarlet tunic, polished helmet with a white horsehair plume, and dark blue riding breeks, dressed more or less as heavy cavalry, such as dragoons. The symbol of the regiment was a mounted knight known the Thane of Fife, which was the colour badge, and had a rather agreeable motto: Pro artis et vocis, for hearth and home. Lastly, but by no means least, we come to one of the better known of the Scottish cavalry formations, the Lovat Scouts, proclaimed by their commander Frederick Burnham to be half wolf and half jackrabbit. The Lovat Scouts were raised for the Boer War by Simon Fraser, 14th Lord Lovat, and recruited heavily from gameskeepers and gillies from Highland estates. Major Burnham was in fact an American of Scots-English descent, raised on a Sioux Indian reservation by missionary parents. He was an excellent scout, having been taught how to track by Apaches and serving with Cecil Rhodes in Rhodesia. When in the Boer War, he combined his knowledge with that of hardy Highland folk. The end result was a premier scouting unit, and is in fact the first unit to pioneer the usage of the ghillie suit. During the war, it was attached to the Black Watch and became a formal sharpshooter unit of the British Army. During the Great War, the regiment formed the 10th Lovat Scouts Battalion of the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, serving in Gallipoli, Egypt, Salonika, and finally France. When in France, the regiment formed detachments of the sharpshooters or snipers which carried out observation and marksman duties across the Western Front. Like the Scottish Horse, the Lovat Scouts was reduced to a single regiment but remained a mounted regiment as the Scouts. The Lovat Scouts initially served in the Second World War as a garrison in the Faroe Islands in order to deter a potential German invasion. However, after 1942, they were sent to Jasper in Canada for specialised ski and mounted warfare training. The Lovat Scouts trained hard and played hard, being entertained by many Scottish expatriates in Canada when on leave. The regiment first saw action in July 1944, landing in Naples, Italy, and took part in the Italian campaign as it rolled up the peninsula until the German surrender. With the war over, the regiment's skills were put to use tracking down senior members of the German leadership. However, were flown in early 1946 to Greece in order to assist them putting down the communist insurgency there. The regiment ceased to exist following the war and became simply C Squadron of the Scottish Horse before becoming 677 Squadron of the Mounted Regiment, Royal Artillery. It was moved and reorganised a number of different times until 1954 it became the 540 Lovat Scouts Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment. In 1967, the regiment became a Lovat Scouts Company in the 3rd Territorial Battalion, Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, which in turn became the 51st Highland Volunteers. The Lovat Scouts had a smart uniform, comprising a blue tunic with Fraser hunting tartan, riding breeks, and a Balmoral bonnet with a black and white dicing. Their cap badge featured a stag, and their motto, Je suis prest, I am ready, which is the clan crest and motto of the Clan Fraser of Lovat, by whom they were raised. The Lovat Scouts arguably pioneered the art of sniping in the British Army, many being assigned to sniper schools and teaching fieldcraft to other regiments in the British Army. And as previously mentioned, they were the first to bring the ghillie suit into military usage, an invaluable piece of kit used by snipers across the world to this day. Ghillie suits are essentially jackets, normally custom made by their wearer, designed to allow their wearer to totally blend into his surroundings and more or less resemble the foliage and landscape surrounding him. Thank you for listening to this video on some of Scotland's cavalry regiments, and we hope you enjoyed listening to about some of the more obscure units. It's sad to reflect that only 2 regiments exist in the Scottish tradition, which are cavalry by origin, and indeed of its many yeomanry units, only 1 regiment now exists for them all. If you enjoyed the video, please give a like and share, and if you are wanting to see the next upload, subscribe and look forward to the next week's video on Scotland's sinister water horse, the Kelpie.